In 1995, Nintendo bet its next great idea on 3D, and the gamble was dead in under a year. It was called the Virtual Boy, and it promised to pull you inside the game into a glowing world of depth and dimension. What it actually delivered was a monochrome red picture that gave people headaches on a machine you could not even carry, and the man behind it was not some reckless newcomer. He was the most beloved inventor Nintendo ever had. This is the story of the Virtual Boy. This is Kilobyte Chronicles. To understand why this failure hurt so much, you have to understand who built it. His name was Gunpei Yokoi, and by 1995 he was a quiet legend inside Nintendo. He had not started as a star. Back in 1965, he joined the company as a maintenance man, keeping the machines running on the factory floor of what was then a humble playing card maker. In his spare time, he tinkered, and one day he built a simple extending toy arm out of spare parts. Nintendo's president spotted it, put it on sale, and it became a national hit. That toy was the Ultra Hand. It sold over 1 million units, and it helped a struggling card company discover that it could make real magic out of play. It changed the course of Yokoi's life, and arguably the course of the whole company. Over the next 30 years, Yokoi became the mind behind some of the most important things Nintendo ever made. The Game & Watch, the little handheld games that were in every school bag in the early 80s. The cross-shaped control pad, born on those very handhelds that nearly every game controller on Earth still copies today. The team he ran, known inside Nintendo simply as R&D1, gave the world Metroid and helped raise a young designer named Shigeru Miyamoto. By the 1990s, if you had ever held a Nintendo device and smiled, there was a good chance Gunpei Yokoi had touched it somewhere. And above all, in 1989, came the Game Boy. The Game Boy was his masterpiece, and it carried a philosophy he lived by, something he called lateral thinking with withered technology. The idea was simple and profound. Do not chase the newest, most expensive parts. Take cheap, proven, almost old-fashioned technology and find a clever new use for it. The Game Boy had a dull, greenish screen and could not show color while its rivals could, and it sold well over 100 million units anyway. Because it was cheap, it ran for ages on a handful of batteries, and it was fun. Yokoi had made Nintendo portable. He had made it rich. And that is the height he was standing on when he reached for something completely different. In the early 1990s, the whole technology world had caught a fever, and the fever was virtual reality. Movies and magazines promised that any day now we would strap on a headset and step bodily into another world. Arcades filled up with giant, clunky virtual reality rigs that cost a fortune. Sega loudly announced a virtual reality headset of its own. Atari was working on one too. Almost none of it actually worked very well, and by around 1994 the hype was already starting to curdle. But Nintendo had quietly seen something it believed in. An American company in Massachusetts called Reflection Technology had spent nearly a decade building an unusual little display it called the Private Eye. Instead of a normal screen, it used a single line of tiny red lights and a fast vibrating mirror, sweeping that line across your vision so quickly that your brain assembled it into one whole floating image. There was no glass screen in front of you at all, only these scanning points of light and mirrors moving faster than the eye could follow, stitching a picture out of pure motion. Show each eye its own slightly different version, and you got something remarkable, a genuine, convincing sense of depth hanging there in the dark. Yokoi was captivated. Nintendo licensed the technology, gave the project the codename VR32, and put a team of around 60 engineers on it for the better part of 4 years. They were so confident that Nintendo built an entire factory in China dedicated to nothing but this one machine. And Yokoi described his vision in almost poetic terms. He wanted to submerge the player in total darkness, to erase the feeling that you were merely looking at a screen, and to drop you inside the game itself. Inside the company, the feeling he was chasing even had a name, the Virtual Utopia experience. For a man who had spent his whole career making the cheap and the simple feel magical, it was the most ambitious swing of his life. But the dream and the machine were two very different things, and the gap between them is where this story really lives. The first problem was color, or rather the lack of it. To show a full-color image, Nintendo would have needed kinds of colored lights that, in 1995, were either wildly expensive or did not yet exist in any usable form. Red was the only light that was cheap enough, bright enough, and efficient enough to work. Now, there was a strange logic to it. Because those little lights glowed against nothing at all, the blacks were perfectly, infinitely black, which actually suited Yokoi's dream of dissolving the screen away into pure darkness. But it also meant the entire Virtual Boy world would be rendered in a single color: red heroes, red menus, red everything, glowing against a bottomless black void. The second problem was worse. The original technology could track the movement of your head, turning the view as you looked around, which is the very thing that makes virtual reality feel real. Nintendo took that out. There were genuine fears about liability and about health, about motion sickness, and about the possibility of harming the developing eyes of children. So the immersive headset became a fixed unit that sat on a little stand on a tabletop, and you had to lean your face into it and hold perfectly still. It was not something you wore. It was not something you carried. It was furniture. And then came the final blow, which was time. Nintendo's true future was the Nintendo 64, its next home console, and the company wanted its best people and its money aimed squarely at that. So the Virtual Boy was rushed. Resources were pulled away, the design was scaled back, and the machine was pushed out the door in a state its own creator did not believe was finished. The dream was right. The machine was not. The Virtual Boy went on sale in Japan in July of 1995, and in North America that August, announced with fanfare and even a splashy write-up in the New York Times, it cost $179.99. To put that in perspective, the Game Boy at the time sold for under $90, so this strange new thing cost roughly twice as much. And almost immediately, nobody quite knew what it even was. Was it a home console? It sat on a table, but only one person could press their eyes into it, so you could not gather the family around. Was it portable like the Game Boy? It ran on 6 batteries, but you had to set it up and hunch over it, so not really. Was it a toy? People took to calling it unkindly the goggles on legs. Store clerks were confused, and confused clerks do not sell machines. It did not help that the timing was brutal. The Sega Saturn and the original PlayStation were already on shelves offering rich color and proper living room games, and Nintendo's own N64 was looming on the horizon. Into that crossfire, Nintendo was asking people to spend real money on a one-player red and black box that sat on a table. Then there was the experience itself. The red and black world was genuinely striking for about 5 minutes, and the depth effect when it worked could be impressive. The pack-in game was a simple, cheerful tennis game starring Mario, and watching the ball arc toward you out of the darkness, it really did feel for a moment like something new. But it was a strangely lonely way to play. Gaming, for most people, was social. A friend on the couch, a sibling grabbing the second controller, the Virtual Boy sealed you off inside a private red bubble, your face buried in a visor, cut off from the room and everyone in it. Whatever it was, it did not feel like the future anyone had been promised. But then for a great many people, it began to ache. Players reported eye strain, headaches, and dizziness. Nintendo put warning labels on the box and a health advisory right on the startup screen telling you to stop and rest your eyes every 15 to 30 minutes. Think about that for a moment. The machine shipped with instructions to stop using it. The dream was right. The machine was not. It was not all bad. A platform game starring Wario was genuinely excellent. Proof that in the right hands the little machine really could shine, and a handful of others, a pinball game, a boxing match seen through a robot's eyes, a frantic brawler called Mario Clash, had their devoted fans. But there were only ever 22 games in total, and most were forgettable. Sales, which had never been strong, simply collapsed. Nintendo cut the price first a little and then all the way down to $99, trying to clear the things off the shelves. It did not work. Retailers dumped the leftovers into bargain bins. In Japan, the Virtual Boy was gone from the market in about 5 months. In North America, it limped along for roughly 7. The last game released for it in America was a version of Tetris in early 1996, and then it was over. All told, it sold, by most estimates, around 770,000 units, a rounding error next to the Game Boy, and it was never even released in Europe. Nintendo, the company that almost never failed, had failed loudly in red. There is a bitter irony buried in all of this. Yokoi's whole genius had been withered technology, taking the humble and the proven and making it sing. And in one sense, the Virtual Boy was exactly that. a machine built from the cheapest little lights he could find. But this time, that withered technology was strapped to a bleeding-edge promise, virtual reality, immersion, the future itself, and those cheap red lights simply could not carry it. His philosophy had always needed a modest, honest goal to work its quiet magic. Pointed instead at a fantasy the world was not ready for, and rushed out before it was finished, it produced the one machine in his long career that felt like less than the sum of its ideas. Yokoi had always known exactly what his tools were for. This time, just once, the tool and the dream did not match. And this is the part of the story where legend and fact get tangled, so let me be careful here. The year after the Virtual Boy flopped, in 1996, Gunpei Yokoi left Nintendo. And ever since, people have told a simple, tragic version of events, that the great Yokoi was pushed out in disgrace, punished for the failure of his 3D machine. It is a tidy story. It may not be a true one. Nintendo has always said the Virtual Boy was not the reason he left. A close colleague said Yokoi had talked for years about wanting to retire early. And Yokoi himself, before he died, wrote that the failure was not why he walked away. Others who knew the company have disagreed, and the honest answer is that we do not fully know what was said behind closed doors. What we do know is what he did next. He did not vanish, and he did not sulk. He started his own company, and he went straight back to doing what he loved, designing a sleek little handheld that would become the Wonder Swan. Released after his death, it would sell well enough in Japan to briefly trouble the very Game Boy empire he himself had built. He was, in other words, still Yokoi, still chasing the next clever machine. And then, on the 4th of October 1997, barely a year after leaving Nintendo, Gunpei Yokoi was killed in a car accident on a Japanese highway. He was 56 years old. The man who had given the world the Game Boy was gone far too soon, and the timing was so cruel that it is fused in memory with the failure of the Virtual Boy, even though the two were never really the same story. But the legend stuck anyway because it made a kind of poetic sense, the great inventor and the machine that seemed to swallow him, even if the real story was quieter and sadder than that. So it would be easy to end here, with a beloved genius and his one great failure, and simply call the Virtual Boy a mistake. But that is not quite right either, because look at what Yokoi and Nintendo were actually reaching for. They wanted to give you depth, real three-dimensional space you could lean into and look around inside. They wanted to submerge you in a game, and that dream, the one the Virtual Boy could not deliver in 1995, did not die with it. 15 years later, in 2011, Nintendo released the 3DS, a handheld that showed genuine three-dimensional depth with no glasses at all, and it sold tens of millions. The rest of the world, meanwhile, kept building toward immersion, toward the headsets that millions of people actually strap on today. The billion-dollar virtual reality industry that grew up decades later, the modern headsets from the biggest names in technology, is chasing the exact feeling Yokoi once tried to bottle in a red box in 1995. When you pull on a headset today and the room falls away around you, you are standing at the far end of a road the Virtual Boy started walking, alone and far too early. The Virtual Boy was not wrong about where games were going. It was just standing in the middle of that road, about 2 decades too early, holding a technology that could not yet keep its promise, that the dream was right, the machine was not. And here's the strangest twist of all. In 2025, 30 years after it flopped, Nintendo announced that it was bringing the Virtual Boy back, letting you play its old games through a little plastic replica that cradles a modern Switch and even a cardboard version you fold together yourself. The machine that Nintendo once seemed to want everyone to forget had quietly become something to celebrate. A cult object, lovingly collected, written about in whole books, its games still coded for by fans who never let it go. Somewhere along the way, the Virtual Boy stopped being only a punchline and became something gentler, a symbol of the beautiful, doomed swing of a company willing to look ridiculous for chasing a real idea a little too soon. Because in the end, the Virtual Boy was never really the measure of Gunpei Yokoi. His measure is the Game Boy in 100 million pockets, and the simple idea he left behind that you do not need the newest or the most expensive tools to make something the whole world will love. You only need to see before anyone else does what those tools are really for. So here's my question for you, and this one is personal. Did you ever get to press your face into one of these in a store or at a friend's house and see that strange red world glowing there in the dark? Do you remember whether it amazed you or gave you a headache or somehow both at the very same time? Tell me about it in the comments below. Subscribe and we will chronicle the next one together.